We seem to be having a lot of terrorism in Canada lately. On the 2nd of July, a group called Resistance Internationaliste bombed a Canadian Forces Recruitment Center in Trois-Rivieres, Quebec. And basically they did it because they're anti-imperialist and they're against the way that the Canadian forces are used to further the agenda of imperialism. Here's the article. CBC group claims responsibility for Quebec blast. Apparently they've been involved in other attacks before. It says here, the group, which has previously claimed responsibility for 2 other attacks in Quebec, claims it is against the militaristic ideals and practices of the Canadian government. And you may remember that in May, there was the bombing of the RBC Bank in Ottawa. CBC News, RBC firebombing suspect appears in court. Yeah, the guys, 3 guys got arrested for this. They were charged with stuff like arson and having the materials for arson and mischief. They were called the FFFC Ottawa, which is weird because no one had ever heard of the FFFC before. And, you know, attaching Ottawa to the name implies that there would be several chapters, but no, there aren't. And nobody's ever, as far as we can tell, nobody's ever heard of the FFFC before. They don't have a website or anything like that. And we were actually wondering what their name stood for. Nobody even knows. They never said what it stood for. False flag for Canada, maybe? And then, of course, we had, you know, the G20, where the Black Bloc, which were probably infiltrated or flat-out police provocateurs, were allowed to torch a couple of police cars and smash all the windows down the street while the police stood by and allowed them to do that. And then the police went and arrested about 700 peaceful protesters, people who were sitting around singing "O Canada," things like that. So we've had a lot of this recently, and you know, we kind of maybe wonder, you know, are these all false flags? Well, I think that the G20 was definitely a military or a police drill, like a martial law drill. But the one in Ottawa, I really don't know. But the one here in Quebec, I don't think it was. But there are some hallmarks of false flags. So one is that they tend to have legislation in place, that everything is set up and then you just need an event like that as a catalyst and then to push the legislation through, like they did with the Patriot Act for 9/11. Technology in place, like they had bought the naked scanners a year before they implemented their use following the Undie bomber at Christmas time. Evidence that looks planted, right? Like leaving 20 keys in the ignition and the cell phone with the number to the fireworks store where they then find you on CCTV to prove your identity, like Faisal Shahzad with the New York Times Square bombing. Stories that make no sense, like that Shahzad had happened to have a duplicate key to his house and his third car, but not to the getaway car that he left a couple blocks away. Inexplicable incompetence, right? Like somebody who goes to train with Al-Qaeda and then comes back and makes a bomb with, you know, firecrackers and unmixed fertilizer, things like that. Police involvement, plants and agents, like with the Toronto 18 who bought fertilizer from the RCMP, or the 96 World Trade Center bombing where they were sold the bomb materials by the police as well. They also had infiltrator agents at both those times. That's the kind of thing that you see with the false flag. Warnings ignored, like Abdul Muttalib, the Undie bomber's father, trying to warn the US government that his son was being radicalized. Or with 9/11, you know, they had warnings as well and they ignored them and said we had no idea. Strange confessions, yeah, like confessional tapes afterwards, or even with the bombing of the IRS building, all that long suicide note on the internet. And drills. There was a drill at 9/11, 7/7, what we had here in the G20, that was a big drill being run. So things like that will tell you it's probably a false flag. In this case of the bombing of the recruitment center, from what I can tell, it's not a false flag. But I don't support these kind of actions because I don't think they accomplish anything really, because these days that kind of thing is just branded as terrorism and ends up just sort of furthering the agenda of the New World Order in the long run. Peaceful protests, they don't seem to accomplish much either, although I'm all for it and I go to protests all the time, but really I think they get largely ignored. you know how it is, or you know, you get victimized like they did at the G20. What else can you do? Sign a petition like the one from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association? Well, some people say that accomplishes nothing, but you know, you got to try. I think that they're a reputable organization, and I signed their petition. You can also write to local representatives. You can call them up and truth them if you think, you know, you can give it a shot. Because a lot of the people that are in government, see, they're not bad people. They just don't even know. You know, like for example, fluoride in the water, let's say. You know, to get a government to pass, to approve having fluoride in a local water supply, you know, they have to approve it, right? But if they really know that the fluoride is poison, they're less likely to approve it because they're not all in on a big conspiracy. They're just in the dark, like most people are. You can also run for government yourself. It's worth a shot. What, maybe if enough truthers run for government, get the Illuminati out of the way. Really, we should look to the Europeans because they are organized. I think it's the biggest difference and why their protests are so much more effective, because they're really well organized, they have a lot of solidarity, and they know how to do things like cripple the system. They know how to stage strikes and effective protests. The thing is that what they do over there seems to be much more effective. Just to give you one example, in France, when they tried to pass a law that employers could fire employees who were under 26 years old without giving any reason or something like that, they had a massive protest. It was like a riot, and they weren't able to, you know, pass the law. Over here, people just go, oh well, gee, that sucks, you know. Strikes are probably one of the most effective things you can do. And even just if people would mobilize like they do for a hockey game and just all show up, you know, en masse, spontaneously, you know, just get off their butts, it just it's a show of force, and I think there is value in these kind of things. Do you guys have any other suggestions on what could be more effective?